tuned in to the Andrew Lawton Show.
So really what we're seeing here is the Liberal government sticking us with a massive, massive bill for the privilege of censoring and regulating what we do online. Now, there's a little bit of good news here in the sense that the Online Harms Act has not yet passed. The Online Harms Act is still in the House of Commons. It has to go through a committee process, has to go through the Senate. There's a possibility that an election comes between now and when this bill passes, and we can get rid of it once and for all. But if this goes ahead, $200 million for an office of bureaucrats to regulate what you say and do online. I learned about this from Conservative MP Michelle Rempel Garner's Substack. She did a great job of diving into what these numbers mean, and she joins us now. Michelle, good to have you back on the show. Thanks for coming on today.
Thanks for having me.
So it's great. We have these two contrasting points today on what the government is spending money on. We have minion tweets from CRA, and then we have the $200 million for what we can say online, which might even just be minion tweets by the end of it, depending on how overzealous this is. But this is what is this office going to do in your view? What's the scenario that you envision from this?
It's a completely unnecessary bureaucracy that will do little to protect Canadians. In fact, I don't think it's going to do anything to protect Canadians from online harassment. And I'm not talking about mean tweets when I talk about online harassment. I'm talking about the stuff that escalates into physical violence. This bill does none of that. And, for them to spend $200 million to hire over 300 new bureaucrats, when we know that agencies like the RCMP are severely under-resourced, it just, like that minion tweet, it just shows that nobody's in charge. Nobody's making common sense decisions. And it's something that, Canadians should be deeply concerned about.
When we see this, there are two aspects of this. There's obviously the cost, but even if the cost were $1 or the costs were negligible, I still think the function of the office is in and of itself fraught. But we also know that the Liberals have a terrible track record at predicting the cost of things. Like the long gun registry is one notable example of, it's supposed to just be pocket change, and then it ends up being $1 billion boondoggle. I have no doubt that something like this would be the same, because they realize that from day one, there's so much more to do. We need more people. And then you also, as I understand it, have other aspects that would increase costs, like the Canadian Human Rights Commission, which also is tasked with enforcing parts of this, not under this office. And they could find themselves needing a whole new annex to house all the new investigators they need to hire. And that could be further millions, couldn't it?
Well, I think your point is super valid, which is regardless of the cost, this is an unnecessary bureaucracy. The PBO analysis today, sort of use a crude analogy, but it's the cherry on a crap sandwich, right? Like it's really bad. But to your point, the bill doesn't protect Canadians from online harassment. It doesn't amend the criminal code to do common sense things like include deepfake pornography as part of Canada's intimate image laws. It doesn't it doesn't do the things that victims' rights groups have been asking for to protect Canadians from crime. But the fact that they're spending all this money on it to essentially, and I mean, this bill has been called Orwellian, an extreme attack on Canadians' freedom of speech by people like Margaret Atwood, by magazines like The Atlantic.
These not hardcore right-wingers here.
Exactly. These are not bastions of conservative thought. And everybody's raising the alarm bells on this. And the fact that the government is so dogmatically attached to this, to your point, it shows nobody's in charge and nobody cares about protecting Canadians. And that's where, I'm really proud of our party's platform, our leaders, Pierre Poilievre, talking about how we need to fix the crime with common sense solutions that don't cost Canadians hundreds of billions of dollars in new bureaucracy.
One point that you had in your Substack on this that I found interesting is that the government has not really provided any estimate of how many complaints it thinks the Canadian Human Rights Commission is going to field on this. So they don't even know how big a bureaucratic backlog this is going to cause. And on one hand, you may say, okay, they can't predict the future. This government can't even accurately assess the present. But it also means that by their own admission, they've not given the PBO the information to really get a sense of how big this number could get.
Again, another great point. There's been a lot of articles that have been written and experts talking about how reestablishing essentially Section 13 of the Canadian Human Rights Act in an age where, you've got cancel culture, online platforms, there will be a deluge of vexatious complaints to try and get people to be silenced. I mean, again, the Toronto Star, again, not a bastion of conservative thought, over 10 years ago, said that this particular part of Canadian legislation needed to be canceled, which is what the previous conservative government did. The Liberal government want to reestablish it now. There's nothing in the legislation to prevent vexatious complaints. So again, what we have here with the PBO report is evidence that the Liberal government is willing to make Canadians pay hundreds of millions of dollars for thought police instead of keeping Canadians safe with common sense measures that we've been proposing from the Conservative Party for months now. I think about my colleague Tim Uppel. He had a really common sense bill to prevent extortion. The Liberals voted against that. And so, it's just so frustrating. And Canadians should be outraged when they see the cost of these things and also see the results of the lack of commitment from the federal Liberal government to protecting their safety. It's just... I was shocked, and it takes a lot to shock me, Andrew, as you are well aware. When I saw those numbers, I was like, you have to be kidding me.
And the bill itself, yeah, and the bill itself, and you alluded to this earlier, Michelle, it lumps in things that few people would take issue with cracking down on, like child sexual exploitation, terror content, with things that are a lot more contentious and a lot more fraught, such as hate speech, where there's not a universal definition of what that is that people can go alongside. Have you gotten any of the sense from your colleagues in the House of Commons that they'd be willing to separate these out when you get to the committee stage?
So, in fact, this was asked in the first round of debate, and the minister said, no, absolutely not, no go. It's right in the record of the House of Commons. I think overall the bill's approach is flawed. Like everything that you talked about there, some of the duty of care aspects that social media platforms should have, like to protect minors from exposure to really harmful types of content, like pornographic images or types of material that could induce self-harm. Social media companies do have a duty of care to do that. But what this bill does is it relegates that responsibility to this new bureaucracy that won't be done for years into the future. Whereas, why doesn't it do something like actually legislate that duty of care right into the bill? Like if they're so concerned about this, why aren't they doing that? And it's because, they have an obese government, to use the words of Pierre, right? Like that's really what they're focused on here. They're not thinking about protecting Canadians. And, it takes away the responsibility from accountable legislators and puts it in a back room behind closed doors where social media companies, big tech companies can lobby whatever they want. And that's not how we should be proceeding here. It's just ridiculous.
I know that the Conservatives have obviously come out against Bill C-63 for the reasons you've mentioned, but if this bill does pass before the next election and the Conservatives form government, would this Digital Safety Commission be gone? Would you scrap it?
Absolutely. We would absolutely scrap this and replace it with common sense legislation that actually protects Canadians, without impinging Canadians' rights and freedoms. We don't believe as Conservatives that Canadians should have to give up their rights and freedoms to things like speech in order to be protected from, legitimate online harassment or legitimate online harm. And, why the Liberal government thinks that they have to do this? Well, I know why they do, because this is their agenda, right? They have a radical agenda to police speech, to control speech. It's why you have Bill C-11, Bill C-18, why you have news bans in Canada. So of course, this is something the Conservatives would not support. We will block this bill at every step of the way while proposing common sense alternatives that will actually keep Canadians safe.
Is your view that existing government agencies and departments can deal with these challenges?
Yes.
And that there's no need for any additional department at all?
Absolutely. 100%. Absolutely. Like the fact that the government didn't start from that premise of how do we use existing agencies, how do we use the criminal code, how do we resource things adequately, is preposterous. That's, you should be thinking about that. That's just basic management. It's something that anybody who owns a small business would be thinking about, right? And not just for cost, but also for ease of use, for simplicity. So these are the things that government should be thinking about. It's what we will be continuing to encourage them to do, but also developing our own plans and announcing those in due course.
And if you get into government, any more minion tweets from CRA?
Can I just have a 5-second rant on this?
Yeah, go for it. It's all yours.
My constituents like one of the top pieces of casework I get in my office is people not being able to get through to the CRA. The rules are so crazy. And then to see that, like, I just, like, my caseworker just, she saw this and she was like, you have got to be kidding me. And rightly so. The government can't afford to be cute right now. They have to get their jobs done. And, this is just, some people be like, oh, it's cute. No, it's indicative of a government with nobody in charge. And I cannot wait to see the communications decision chain on who approved that. I'm sure it was approved by 400 bureaucrats over 3 weeks. So.
Yeah, I was about to respond to your tweet, but I had to go on air. I'm filing an ATIP right after the show.
I am too.
Okay, well, we'll see who gets the response back more quickly. But anytime I ATIP a tweet, like the stupidest tweet will have like a chain of 12 people on it,
yes.
different departments, they, third-party consultations for like one tweet. It's insane. This one, I know will be in that category.
Ugh, all right. Giddy up. I've got to go
all
to
right.
the Stampede.
Conservative MP Michelle Rempel Garner, enjoy the Calgary Stampede. I think
Thank
it's coming up. You should have a good time there.
Take care.
Thanks for listening to The Andrew Lawton Show. Support the program by donating to True North at www.tnc.news.